Mary, you want to go ahead and open the meeting? She's unmuted. Phil, do you want to, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Dave.
You want to go ahead and open the meeting? All you just need to do is call it to order, and then, up here she is.
Everybody, I think we've got a couple more minutes on my clock anyway, till we start the meeting, and hopefully more people will join. So just be patient, please, for a couple more minutes. Okay, welcome everybody. This is Mary O'Brien. I'm chair of the select board right now. And welcome to the our select board meeting, which is primarily a public meeting about the ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan Act monies that have come to the town. We're looking for ideas and committee members eventually. So I also want to welcome Jim Kelly. This is his first select board official meeting. So, hey, Jim. And first thing on the agenda is adjustments. Does anybody have any adjustments to the agenda? If anybody has, you need to unmute. Okay. Next thing are public comments on anything except the ARPA money and ideas for ARPA. You can raise your hand. I hope everybody knows how to do that. And
recording in progress.
Let's see. Okay, this meeting is being recorded, so hopefully everybody knows that. And I don't hear anything about public comments, so I'm going to turn this over to our town manager, Dave Ormiston, who will introduce Sarah Raitt from Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Planning Commission, and she's going to lead our meeting. Okay, Dave.
Thank you, Mary. As Mary mentioned, we are here for public discussion on the American Rescue Plan Act funding that we have received. Town of Hartland has received just over $1 million of the ARPA.
Dave, you're muted.
Oh, 1 second. They can't hear us. I'm not sure why.
I can hear you through SAU's microphone.
Yeah, we're supposed to be going through.
Sarah can't hear you either.
So that's on her end. Because
Okay.
Sarah can hear you and Mary can't. That's Mary's fault.
Barry O'Brien, can you hear me?
Can someone send a chat message to Mary? And just tell her
Yes.
it's on her end because we can hear each other.
Yes, I will let her know.
I can hear now.
Okay.
So Dave, you should be getting.
Okay, take two. So here to talk about ARPA money. Town has received just over $1 million of the American Rescue Plan Act money. The money is essentially for COVID relief. It was made available to the municipalities to help states and municipalities recover from the pandemic. Just know that the allowable uses are restrictive and somewhat complicated to follow. That's why we have invited Sarah here. As Mary mentioned, Sarah is from Two Rivers Ottaquiti Regional Planning Commission. She's here to explain some of the, or to decipher some of the Department of Treasury guidelines and to moderate the discussion as well between the residents. We do have 2 meetings planned tonight, and then we do have a follow-up meeting scheduled for Thursday night, January 27th, again at 6:30. Tonight is, Sarah is going to spend time educating us again on Department of Treasury guidelines, and then the discussion is to be broad. We'd like people to kind of throw out ideas or share ideas that they may have, hopefully based upon some of the guidance that Sarah gives us. And then the second meeting on the 27th, we hope to narrow the scope. We hope to have kind of look at these ideas in more detail. Prioritize these ideas at the end of the, or by the end of the second meeting, have kind of a list of a shorter list of ideas, prioritize, and through this process, both meetings, we hope that some enthusiastic individuals will kind of become a parent or want to participate further beyond the 2 meetings, participate as a committee, follow the details or follow the ideas further, and then ultimately make a recommendation to the select board on uses of the money. I did talk to Sarah earlier. Some ideas have been submitted to me personally. We will allow Sarah to get into the Department of Treasury details. We'll open it up to the floor. And then at a particular time, I can share those ideas as well if they haven't been shared already. Sarah, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Dave. I wonder if, do we still need to go through the list of participants to identify folks, or do you feel comfortable moving forward?
There are a couple that, you know, are kind of just one words, you know, for instance, Chuck, is that Chuck Fenton?
Chuck, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Chuck, can you identify yourself?
He said his name in the chat. I don't know.
Okay, Rob Andrig is Rob Andrig and Jennifer Grant. Doug L, is that Doug Linnell or somebody else? If you can unmute yourself and identify yourself, that would be very helpful to us.
Yes, this is Doug Linnell, and I'm here with my wife, Nancy Lewis, also. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Good to hear from you.
Yes, and good luck, everybody, tonight.
looks like we also have somebody on the phone.
I recognize that's the Bibby's number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so for the babies who are on the phone, to unmute yourself on the phone, it's *6. So that'll be helpful when we get into the later portion of the meeting where we're talking through ideas together. So for everybody else, please remain on mute for the time being. And when we move into the discussion portion, I'll ask you to please raise your hand. You can do that using the reactions button down at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to get to everybody in order of the hands that have come up. And if you're having any trouble with the hand button, you can also just wave at us and we'll pick up your name there. So I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation here. Okay, can everybody see those slides? Dave, can you give me a thumb up if that's sharing correctly? Awesome, wonderful. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Again, my name is Sarah Raitt. I work as a regional planner with Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, and I serve as the office's ARPA liaison. So I assist towns in understanding the ARPA regulations and navigating the logistics of using ARPA funding, which as a typical federal program is fairly involved. And then I also support community outreach, just like this evening, where we're generating ideas around what can be done with this very unique federal allocation that's been given directly to towns and villages in our region. So I'm going to give a sort of very high level bird's eye view of the ARPA funding regulations and sort of give you an introduction in that way. For those of you who have been following ARPA news, you'll know that exactly 1 week ago, last Thursday, there was sort of a sea change in the ARPA landscape, and all of the ARPA liaisons from the regional planning commissions and the Vermont League of Cities and Towns have really been scrambling to sort of wrap our minds around how things have changed. In the interim, it looks like we have a couple more people in the waiting room, so I'm just going to admit them as we're going through here. Okay. No, looks like they're with us now. Okay, so diving in. Geez, there we go. It's just a few notes on timeline to start off. So as many of you are aware, the ARPA payments are being made to municipalities in equal tranches, and the first 50% of the town's award was paid to the town in August and September of this past year. The second half of the award is going to be coming in August and September of this year. Now we're in 2022, hard to believe it. And the total allocation for the town is just shy of $1,050,000, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there. More notes on timing. ARPA is really designed to cover expenses that were incurred prior to March 3rd of 2021. It's really sort of billed in the rule itself as being a prospective piece of funding legislation. And so they're really trying to encourage municipalities to spend this money on current and future needs to strengthen the town and support the well-being of its residents. All of the funds have to be obligated by the end of calendar year 2024. So that means that they have to be under contract. You have to have made the purchase. You had to have entered into a sub-award agreement, some sort of formal agreement to make a payment so that those funds are committed by the end of calendar year 2024. All of the funds have to be expended by the end of calendar year 2026, and any funds that are not expended at that point in time have to be returned to Treasury. So now let's get into the meat of what you can spend ARPA money on. And again, this has changed dramatically in the past week. So really the first and most important category that I think everybody needs to be focusing on right now is number one, which you can see, lost revenue. Lost revenue is basically a catch-all category. And Treasury has really, especially in the final rule issued last Thursday, has really tried to make that category as flexible as possible so that we can sort of smooth the road, especially for smaller municipalities, which were really struggling, honestly, to fit their needs into the draft regulations that existed prior to last Thursday, and all of the caveats that came with it. So effectively, Treasury has set a standard allowance of $10 million for every town, every village, regardless of the size, that they consider to have been revenue lost due to the pandemic. That may not actually equal the amount of revenue that your municipality has lost due to the pandemic. It probably doesn't. But what they're saying is that you can spend up to $10 million of your ARPA award as lost revenue, which means you can spend it on any service that is traditionally provided by a government. So anything you would normally spend your general funds on. And so that means that Hartland can categorize the entirety of its award, $1,048,000, as lost revenue, should you desire to do so. Or you could categorize a portion of your award as lost revenue if you want to fit other sort of pots of money into the other existing eligible use categories under ARPA. So that's how lost revenue is going to work. And we're anticipating that for most municipalities, that's going to be the easiest road for them to take. Treasury has promised that reporting requirements for lost revenue category spending are going to be much more streamlined than you would find for other eligible use categories in ARPA. And so we don't have a finalized compliance and reporting guidance yet. We're anticipating that that's going to be revised because the old document is really sort of speaking towards the draft interim rule and doesn't reflect the changes that were made last week. And so we don't know exactly what the reporting is going to look like for these various categories, but we do expect that lost revenue is going to be vastly easier for towns to work under. The other eligible categories that we're working with are firstly, pandemic response. So that means projects that respond directly to public health or economic impacts of the pandemic. And that can include direct assistance to households, to businesses, to nonprofits, or impacted industries like the hospitality sector. Another eligible use category is premium pay to essential workers. And the rule has quite specific guidelines around who constitutes an essential worker and exactly how much can be paid to them in addition to their regular salaries. And so those are considerations to keep in mind under the premium pay sort of umbrella, as it were. The final eligible use category, as it were, really pertains to infrastructure. And this is something that's been advertised quite widely in public discussions around ARPA, is that it really is trying to drive investment in water, sewer, and broadband. So that means drinking water and wastewater. And again, there are sort of very specific guidelines around what kinds of projects are eligible in the water and sewer. Most of the projects that are eligible have to fit within the guidelines of the existing federal programs, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. There are a small handful of projects that have been added to the eligibility list outside of those federal programs, and that includes culvert upsizing, which is very exciting. I know that was a request that really was pushed by a lot of small towns across America in the comments on the rule. And then in terms of broadband, there are requirements around the speed of the service that ultimately gets delivered if you're using ARPA funding, and also requiring the service provider to have specific affordability programs for low-income users. So again, there are sort of caveats and nuances to groups 2, 3, and 4 here, categories 2, 3, and 4. And we also anticipate considerably more reporting requirements. What is not clear to us at this point in time is whether it would be possible to do, for example, a project that would normally fall under the category 4 here, the water infrastructure category, if you could do that project and call it lost revenue, and whether you would still trigger the same reporting requirements that would happen under the category 4 for those kinds of projects. And that's something that the lawyers are still, and the municipal finance professionals are still trying to figure out. So that's sort of the universe of possibilities. Oh, I do apologize. Let's talk about what the don'ts are, what Treasury says you cannot spend money on. And the first of those is you cannot make extraordinary contributions to pension funds in order to reduce your liability. on a pension fund. So you can make normal payments as you would normally pay on any particular pay period to an employee as part of their salary. For example, if you were doing salary for folks who are responding to COVID as part of their job, or if you're doing premium pay for those employees, but you can't make extraordinary contributions to your pension fund in order to reduce an accrued liability on that front. You can't sort of squirrel money away into rainy day funds or other financial reserves. And you cannot use ARPA funding to do any sort of debt service. That applies to debt regardless of when it was incurred. So really what we're taking away in terms of the messaging from Treasury around this particular issue is that if a town has a very large project that they want to undertake, perhaps an infrastructure project, the ARPA funds that go towards that project really need to constitute like a very large down payment, or you're paying in full. And any financing that happens on that project needs to be funded through other sources. Also, we are not permitted to use ARPA funds on any projects that undermine efforts to stop the spread of COVID. This is very specific to CDC guidelines, and the examples that Treasury gives is that they'll say, well, you can't, for example, create a program and say to a business, for example, you can't access aid from this program if you require people to wear masks in your establishment, because CDC guidelines promote the wearing of masks. So you can't prohibit somebody from accessing this ARPA assistance because they're following CDC guidelines. So again, no projects that run counter to the CDC recommendations that are out there to protect public health. And then finally, ARPA funds can't be used on projects that fail to comply with the regulations that are in the sort of terms and conditions of this particular grant award, which basically state you have to follow all applicable federal, state, and local laws. And that's a particular interest, I think, for us to consider when we're thinking about construction projects. And what we're trying to communicate to towns right now is that there are very specific requirements around procurement, around contracting for federally funded construction projects. And so that's something to keep in mind before you get rolling on any project. So those are the don'ts of ARPA. And we're going to move into brainstorming now. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Before we dive into actually talking about individual project ideas, I'd like to take a few minutes and think through evaluation criteria. So David mentioned that at the next meeting on January 27th, we're going to be doing some prioritization of projects so that the committee that's eventually formed after January 27th will have a sense of what are the top projects, what the community wants to put the most effort into further developing those ideas. And in order to do that prioritization, we have to establish criteria by which projects are going to be evaluated. And so what I'd like to do right now is take just a few minutes to think collectively about, let's see if I can share my screen here and share the appropriate one. There we go. Okay. Dave, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
Yep.
Awesome. Beautiful. So I'd like to take just a few moments and ask for your input on what criteria you'd like the town to take into consideration as they're evaluating, prioritizing projects. What are the characteristics of a good project? What are the impacts that a project should have? What are the kinds of analyses that you'd like to have done when you're determining whether a project should move forward? So we're going to go ahead and open the floor. And if you have anything you'd like to say, go ahead and raise your hand. Again, you can do that using the reactions button on your screen. And if you are on the phone, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. So Jim, it looks like you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts as we get started. I think the town probably has a limited capacity in terms of how many
projects they can take on. So when I start to think about criteria in my mind, I think about size, complexity, duration. And it just seems like if we can have a few well-chosen projects, that may be better than, lots of, kind of smaller projects that take up more time. So just, it's not a requirement, it's just a thought as people go through this exercise.
Thank you, Jim.
Grab the chair and bring it over here. Have you ever tried to do one of these Zoom? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure who's speaking at the moment, but if you could please mute yourselves.
That's Christopher Meyer.
It's me.
Thank you. Helen, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say it should have long-lasting results for the town. Not just, a short time limit, should be long-lasting results. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you so much. Anna, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. I think projects that are targeted towards populations who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And I'm thinking like there's even like guidance there in the interim and the final rule that states specifically like low income and moderate income households. And also I would think like projects that help people meet basic needs during a pandemic. So like housing, food, like job security, childcare access.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna. Gregory, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I think that one of the criteria should be that the project should benefit the largest number of people in town as possible. So I think everybody's been impacted.
Thank you, Gregory. Becca Warren.
Hi, I just want to underline and add to what Anna had said about serving populations who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. I think that's this is a unique funding stream, and I think it is important to focus on people in town who not only are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, but perhaps they were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic because they have very little flexibility to respond to a crisis. Perhaps they're already living in crisis in a day-to-day way. So to me, that would be important. And there's recently I've become aware in the state did this climate action plan, and there was a worksheet in that there was a subcommittee of the Climate Action Council that put together a guide for thinking about it. They call it just transition, but assessing whether policy decisions, in the case of the climate action policy, really affects those who are most disproportionately impacted by climate change. And I think that there are some tools from that subcommittee that would be useful to consider as a guide for thinking about uses of these funds in town.
Thank you, Becca. And sorry, so what was the document that you were referring to?
Yeah, so it's called the Just Transitions document from the Climate Action Plan. It might be called a rubric, but yeah, I can share that with yourself or Dave later. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Next on the list, we have Rob.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Grant. And what I think we really need to focus on this kind of echoes a little bit of what Helen Esmond said earlier, is to make sure that we're looking at projects that will increase resilience. So both in terms of avoiding future crises when possible, and then being ready to deal with them when they do occur. So resilience around avoiding and addressing future crises.
I see that Andrea's in the waiting room, so I'm letting her in. Next, we have Jennifer.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what a lot of people have said about investing in things that are going to have long-term community benefits. And in particular, somebody had mentioned in the chat room about seniors, but I'm thinking about the school community, which has been really struggling, very directly affected by the pandemic and the restrictions, and trying to figure out how to safely educate our children and keep them safe and happy in their tiny school. So I think anything we can do to support the school system would be a really direct community benefit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next on the list, Stacy.
Hi, yeah, good evening. I think one of the important criteria of any project we do with these funds, it should be something that's sustainable moving forward into the future, and not be creating undue expenses once these funds are gone, that we find to be burdensome to taxpayers.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, next on the list, I have Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca Genovese. I want to echo what Stacy says too, and I think that is thankfully specifically addressed in the plan, that it cannot create future expenditures or deficits for the town, and I'm happy to see that. I want to echo a lot of these, and that let's do something that is really needed, not a pet project. That, you know, on the surface, we look like a pretty happy-go-lucky flush town, and I think there's really a lot of hidden need. No offense to any of the homes with children, but a roof over your head and oil in the tank costs just the same for a household without children.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, Rebecca, I'm going to lower your hand. So now we're going to go ahead and move into, now that we've taken a little bit of time to think about what we're looking for, we're going to go ahead. Oh, I'm so sorry. Gordon, we can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself, please? Gordon, can you hear us? Okay, 1 second. I'm gonna ask you to unmute. Doesn't seem to be working. If you're able to type it to the chat, can you leave us a comment there?
Am I unmuted now?
Oh, perfect. Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just had one, I don't have a hand raising thing on my iPad, I guess. I was just thinking projects, what I wrote down was projects that would otherwise be very hard to fund with taxes.
Okay.
That, in other words, normally we can fund most of our problems with taxes, but there are things that would be hard to do that way. So that was my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay. So now that we've taken a little bit of time to think about what we'd like to see, we're going to start diving into talking about specific projects, and going to, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a brainstorming document that I'm going to share with everyone. And before we start populating that document, I'm also going to drop in the chat, and I hope everybody has access to it, a link to a Google document. So I'd like everybody to go to the chat, go ahead, click on that link. Good, it looks like people are showing up. Excellent. So this is sort of an overflow document, and I know that there are a lot of people on the call this evening. If you are unable to, if there's not enough time for us to call on you, or if you're like myself and you're an introvert and you'd rather just submit a written comment, that resource is there for you. So we will be referring to it as much as we can. during the dialogue, but that's so that you can start entering ideas in as you have them. And of course, we'll have an actual verbal dialogue as well as we go through, and I will be populating a document, which I'm going to share with you now, so that everybody can work together and sort of follow along. Great, so I do not see Dave, but if anybody can give me a thumbs up to let me know that they can see the shared document now.
We've got it here, Sarah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. So as I said, please go ahead, feel free to enter stuff into the Google document. I see that stuff's already going in there, which is fantastic. I'm going to go through a handful of ideas that the town staff have already come up with, and we'll talk about them very briefly. And then we will dive into your ideas and we'll ask for you to comment on them. So before I take your question or comment, Becca, I'm going to go ahead and just walk through these town staff ideas. So firstly, we have digitizing records in the town clerk's office so that it can facilitate online access, which is obviously very important during a pandemic. My understanding is that the best cost estimate available at this point in time is about 11 grand. Dave, do you have anything that you or other staff would like to add with regard to that project?
I do believe the town clerk, Brian Strappolino, is on here. If Brian has anything he wants to add, other than it's, yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Yeah. I think initially we realized that digitization would apply under ARPA, but we also have a preservation fund that we can use for digitization. So I think we don't need to use this money for this cause. I think there are other priorities that might make more sense, given that we have a preservation fund that we could utilize for digitization.
Wonderful, thank you. That's very helpful. Next project I have here is to upgrade the town's website for communication and also potentially text alerts at an approximate cost of about $7,500. Would anybody from the town like to comment, town staff like to comment on that particular project idea?
The person, Sarah, that would be doing that, I don't believe is on the line, or perhaps she's watching from, via cable, but, it would strengthen ours is a really basic website, and I think that we can upgrade that and make it better for an interactive tool with the public, so that, we can interchange information better than what we're doing now. And again, during the pandemic, with the closure of the buildings, being able to communicate was pretty critical. So both that and the texting system kind of falls under that.
Great, thank you. And I've put that under lost municipal revenue because I think that's the easiest fit. It might go under pandemic response, but I think that the language in the rule doesn't exactly lend itself to that. So the easiest road is probably under lost revenue for that particular project idea. Next one down, I have laptop computers for each department so that the staff can work remotely at an approximate cost of about $7,500 for a total of 5 laptops. Any comments town staff would like to make about that?
Stacy Bradley, you're on this meeting. Is there anything you want to say about that, or?
I guess the only thing I would add is that basically rather than expect staff to have to use their own personal devices, if they even have the ability or capacity to be able to use, their personal laptops or computers, if you've got, especially when we were alternating staff, it would be nice to be able to have a laptop per department. So when you have you know, one staff member working remotely on a remote work day, that they're, you know, utilizing a device that's owned and, you know, it has the proper firewalls and safety features and everything else in place to help protect the computer structure of the municipality, as well as just make it easier. The only other thing I think I would maybe add, maybe in this, not to the laptops and computers, but some thought for those of those working in Damon Hall, possibly some air filtration devices to be available in the offices. We know we're not going to be able to retrofit a whole giant HVAC or air filtration system in the whole building, but to be able to have something individual. And, you know, the Lister's office, for instance, there's 3 people that work in that small office. So that would be something to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, couple more projects that were proposed by town staff. The box culvert on Jennyville Road at an estimated cost of 175 to 200 grand. Would anybody from the town like to speak to that project?
So Sarah, I do not believe Bill, the highway foreman, is on the call, but I can add that this is a culvert that's been top of our priority list for about 2-3 years at this point in time. It's an undersized culvert. It's failed several times in the past, particularly in the last 20 years. Most notably in 2019, it washed out Jennyville Road. At some point in time, actually the road narrows through there to 1 lane. It was never really put back. At one point it was kind of washed out, wasn't put back to full capacity. So in that area, it also gets down to 1 lane. So this is something that we've been looking at for a couple of years now.
Great, thank you. We also have here ditching and culvert projects that are listed in the town's municipal roads general permit plan. Dave, would you like to speak to that either as a general category, if there are specific projects that you wanted to call out?
Sure, I'll kind of keep it general, Sarah, in this sense. We do have 35 miles of ditching that we need to do. We had some priority segments that needed to be done by 2025. We have kind of pecked away at that. The grants and aid program, which is done through V-Trans, has helped us kind of support that. But we're really kind of moving along at a slow rate, maybe not even a quarter mile per summer. And again, we need to get to the end date of 2035, not to mention that it's just, the end result is just good for the roads. You know, take away from the fact that it's a statutory requirement of ours. Utilizing ARPA monies, if it's eligible, would allow us to accelerate that process and move along at a quicker rate. So instead of doing maybe a half of a segment or 1 segment per summer, you know, while we're out there, we can do the segment above, segment below, you know, with the same contractor, and again, just accelerate that process to move that along.
Thank you. And then the final idea that I have here from town staff is premium pay for town employees. Again, those who have been working during COVID and have been exposed to higher risk.
So it is a eligible category under the ARPA funds, and town staff has been, you know, on the front lines from the beginning. We did have some closures last winter at about this time where we were kind of intermittent with staff, you know, one group of staffing on for 2 days, next group on for 3 days, etc. However, we have been here pretty well through, whether it be tax collections or dog tags or, you know, carbon stickers or whatever. You know, we're mostly vaccinated at this point in time, but there's certainly been times where it was kind of a stay-at-home order, yet we were here and trying to operate.
Great, thank you so much. And so a note on the organizational scheme of this particular document. I have classified projects that could probably fall under other eligibility categories, under those other categories, just as sort of a note of reference, with the understanding that any sort of general government service could go under lost municipal revenue, as you see at the top of the document here. But it is worth keeping track of those projects that could be categorized under other funds. Again, we're not exactly sure how the logistics of categorizing ARPA money as lost revenue will work. And so it's possible that a particular expenditure under lost revenue might create some headaches, and it might be an easier path to go under a different eligibility category. So it's worth keeping track of the cross-pollination, as it were, between categories. Okay, so at this point, we'd like to open it up to the floor and ask for your thoughts. And I know that Becca's had her hand up for a while. Thank you so much for your patience, Becca.
No, thank you, Sarah. This is so much information. I was going to ask actually about this lost municipal revenue category. If you could, again, go over what this category is. I didn't quite absorb what you said at the beginning. So if you, and maybe that would be helpful for others as well. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. So the lost municipal revenue is effectively a catch-all category, which Treasury has created to streamline things for small towns, because in the previous iteration of this rule, small towns were finding it pretty hard to fit their needs into the little boxes that Treasury had created for all these eligible use categories. And so basically what they said was, if you have a award from Treasury of under $10 million, you can dedicate all of that award, you can classify all of that award as lost revenue. And that's certainly the case with Hartland. So you could categorize the entirety of your award, $1,050,000, as lost revenue, or you could categorize a portion of it as lost revenue. Lost revenue categorization basically means that you're spending that money on anything that you would spend your general fund on. So that's any service that your government typically provides, whether that relates to infrastructure or town staffing or communications. It's really very wide open. Does that help?
Yes, that is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Other questions or ideas, project ideas? Okay, wonderful. Gregory, why don't you go ahead? Gregory, can you hear us? Gregory, if you can hear us, I've asked you to unmute.
By the suggestion about the ventilation for Damon Hall.
Oh, there we go. Gregory, is that you?
Pardon me?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Could you speak up a little bit? It's hard to hear you.
Sorry. I was wondering about the possibility of improving ventilation in the school in terms of resilience to the continuation of this pandemic, really when it becomes endemic, and for the future.
Thank you. Okay, so what I heard was improving ventilation at the school. Is that correct?
Right.
Wonderful. Thank you. And do you have any information on what a project like that might cost or when it would need to be done, like a time frame?
No, I don't. I think that would have to certainly be looked at. I think it may provide a big benefit in terms of allowing continued education.
Thank you so much. Okay. I'll go ahead and ask you to mute again. And it looks like the next person we have in line here is Jim. Go ahead, Jim.
Sir, just curious, I mean, we have a volunteer fire department here. Could we invest in them in terms of resiliency and, public safety? If there was a project there that, or a piece of equipment that they needed?
So are you aware of a specific need that you want to target in
No,
this
I'm not aware of a
discussion?
specific need. It's just a thought, just really, would it apply if we identified a need?
I think it would absolutely be categorizable under lost revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Anna, you're next in line. Go ahead.
Thanks. I do have a few, so I'll try to be brief. One is expanding childcare services, and I'm thinking through like maybe a subsidy to low-income households who are struggling to pay for childcare services. And I'm also thinking about how there's lots of studies that show that women have particularly been slow to return or had to leave the workforce and have been slow to return to the workforce because of the pandemic, because of having to take care of children at home. So yeah, subsidies. And I know that there's I think I heard that there's like an additional classroom that's not being utilized at the site that's it's owned by the town. I think it's like the co-op nursery. So maybe if we could expand like rooms and I don't know if it's possible to like use money to like hire initially like a new teacher, something like that. I'm also thinking about investments in affordable housing. We have a nonprofit that services this area, the Twin Pines Housing Trust, and they have lots of experience working with municipalities on expanding access to affordable housing. I am a North Hartland resident, and over the summer, our pump went out and we did not have access to clean water. So that's another thing that I wonder if we could spend money on, is improving the infrastructure at the North Hartland Cooperative Water System. I'm thinking about job training programs and expanding broadband access. Again, thinking about people who are working remotely or students who are taking classes on Zoom. Maybe there's a broadband benefit that can be given to households.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. Okay, next in line, we have Sarah. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Like Anna, I have a couple of suggestions, but I really wanted to point out that I and others have been adding things to your Google Doc. And these are things, most of them that I have added. First of all, I'd like to echo what Anna and others have said with regards to the North Hartland water system. And my question is, are there any options for working on that water system under this ARPA money? My understanding is that there are, I don't live in North Hartland. I don't know the details. Others can inform us, but it seems to be a major repeating problem, which is, I think, unacceptable and needs attention, ARPA or somehow else. A separate issue is I would like to suggest apprenticeships for underemployed or unemployed Hartland residents, or other options in job training programs. In particular, apprenticeships in green energy. We need so many. Possibly apprenticeships in childcare. We need to expand childcare. I think it's possible to support childcare providers in Hartland. We do have a few, or as others have suggested, maybe some form of subsidies to families needing childcare so that the parent or both parents can work. I also would like to suggest, if possible, small business assistance to those Hartland small businesses that stayed open for the past 2 years to help us all get through it. And I think we all know who those are, and probably I'm not going to name names because I might forget somebody and insult somebody, but we all know who we're talking about. And then the last thing that has been mentioned by a couple of people is the issue of air quality and air filtration mechanisms. And this is clearly has to do with being prepared for the next pandemic. And unfortunately, we've all known that this was always coming, and now we're dealing with it. So let's learn our lesson and be prepared. I do know a little bit about this because the Energy Committee has been working on a proposal for an HVAC upgrade in the library. And one possibility is in an upgrade, make sure that you include the air quality, air purification systems. I cannot tell you what the cost would be of that component. But when you do an upgrade or a major renovation, that's when you want to put it in. And I'll stop there.
Sarah, I just want to jump in for a minute because it's come up a couple times. Just for a little background, the water system in North Hartland is it's a non-municipal. It's a cooperative water system out in North Hartland. It's non-municipal.
Yes, I learned that in trying to learn a little something about it. So I had no idea whether or not ARPA money could be used. But then I would just make the statement that I think the town really has to focus on fixing that one way or another.
From an ARPA eligibility standpoint, I can say that there are two possible roads, right? One is to categorize that as a water infrastructure project. And the key there would be that it would need to be eligible under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And I'm not sure whether it might also fall under expanded categories. Yes, so in the Treasury's expansion of the interim draft rule, they've also included infrastructure to improve access to safe drinking water for individuals served by residential wells, including testing, treatment, remediation, et cetera. So there is sort of a focus on the private access to water there. So that's a possibility. We have been warned by the state many times over that Drinking Water State Revolving Fund eligibility is an incredibly complex animal to deal with. So again, classifying it as a water infrastructure project under ARPA might be problematic. Just because the system is not municipally owned does not necessarily mean that you couldn't categorize that kind of project under lost revenue if you sort of agreed that the town was going to sort of take the responsibility for improving access to water, and that's considered part of, you know, general services for public health and well-being. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about that kind of a project.
Thank you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand. Thank you, Sarah. Next on our list here is Kurt Peterson. Kurt, if you can hear us, go ahead and unmute.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So you said something before, or someone said something before about spending money on the schools. And I'm trying to calculate in my mind the relationship between the school and the town. In other words, if the town gets the money, can it spend it on a school that it doesn't really, which really isn't just a town facility? I mean, it belongs to the school district or board or whatever, maybe. I'm not trying to say something, I'm trying to ask a question poorly.
So I think from an eligibility standpoint, the question is whether it's sort of a public facility and whether the town wants to make an investment for sort of public impact, right? So that's how it would sort of get categorized under lost revenue. I know that there are towns across Vermont that have been sort of trying to figure out how they can help their schools. And so they have been making contributions to their schools, especially during the pandemic. That's sort of what I see as the nexus there. And if there are specific sort of projects, for example, an HVAC project in a school, then that could certainly go under pandemic response. Does that help at all?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
Carol, let me jump in again real quick. I also had a question in the chat about the ditching and whether, you know, there's a long-term expense to that kind of after the fact. The answer is yes to kind of both his questions. There is, you know, ditching will always, we will need to do ditching long after the ARPA money is gone. You know, what we do today, years from now, we'll need to go back and do again, so it's kind of recurring. I think the point here is that we do have the 35 miles just to do once, or to re-ditch from 20 years ago that we need to do by 2035. So accelerating that process again would be a benefit, but it's a lot like farming, Kurt. It's kind of a recurring. It's always going to need to be done.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Next on our list here, we have Jennifer. Jennifer, go ahead.
These are all fantastic ideas, and obviously there's some really, really keen needs in town, and it's interesting to see them all here because we all know them. I'm hoping that this funding can go to many of those. I would like to add to the list a cooperative project between the town and the school that is trying to expand and greatly enhance their outdoor classroom system and access to the outdoor classroom system. So we have an accessible trail project that is ready to go. That's about $170,000, and are looking for funding for that. And certainly it's definitely related to their need for all these kinds of flexible spaces to keep kids safe. There's also a community benefit to it as well, but just wanted to add that to the list.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Rob, you're next.
Hi, Jennifer Grant. It doesn't allow us to rename under this function. I think
Sorry
others
about
have run into
that.
that. So a couple of thoughts again around resilience and the need for timely and effective communication tools. So some fairly minor expenses, but things that I think would be important looking forward. One would be a town Facebook page that provided a place that things could be posted and updated and allow for responses by townspeople. That's used very effectively in other towns, whether it's by fire departments or police departments, town utility functions, a way that we can communicate effectively with townspeople and allow interactive responses in addition to, of course, our listserv. And the second thought was around the pandemic response piece. With the pandemic, there's been a greater need for the communications provided by our two local cable access stations that serve Hartland, CATV and WCTV. So not only streaming meetings and recording them, making them available on the web, via YouTube, via Facebook, and so on. So I would advocate for increased support for those essential services that are provided to the town by nonprofits, and those have been impacted in terms of the need during this time. And so the essential services that are provided to the town by the local cable access, so CATV and WCTV is the other one. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you very much. Okay. We have, it looks like a hand from SAU. Is there someone in the room, Dave, who would like to make a comment?
Yeah, hey Sarah, my name is Randy Strawbridge. I've been a Hartland resident for about 30 years now, and I'd like to talk about making sure that everybody in Hartland actually has access to high-speed internet. It's my understanding that roughly 75% of Hartland is currently has access through VTEL, So that leaves roughly, or no, 95%, yes, that leaves like 5% of Hartland residents don't actually have access to high-speed internet. And the FCC classifies high-speed internet as 25 megabits per second for download speeds. And where I live, I literally get 1 megabit, 1.3 megabits per second. So I can't do Zoom meetings at home. That's why I'm here. So, I mean, 95%, there's only 2 other people here. Everybody else works from home. You're talking about doing, you know, Facebook, this, that. Like, I cannot do this from home. So I'm asking for help trying to get that 5% of Hartland broadband access. Literally, I'm at 1.3 megabits per second. It's totally unreliable. I can't Zoom. I can't work from home. My son can't do at-home classes. Yeah, I'm paralyzed. During the pandemic, I'm paralyzed. Can't do anything.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Let's see here. So is there anyone else in the room with you, Dave, who wanted to make a comment?
No, we're good. I can hold off on mine until we've got a couple more hands up here, and then I see Stacy, and we can come back and I can throw out the ones that were provided to me.
Great, thank you. So next on our list is Jay Bell.
Hi, yeah, this is Jack Bell. I manage a business called Longview Forest. We're located down on Ferry Road here in Hartland. And I had heard, I don't know if it's already in this list or not, but that town water and sewer in this neighborhood was maybe something being considered with this funding. So I just wanted to say that I think, we would certainly be excited about that. We bought a 28-acre brownfield property down here in 2017, and we relocated our office business headquarters from where we'd been in Westminster to here in Hartland, and finished a partially built house on this property that the prior owner had started building, and moved our offices here. And we're doing permitting right now to hopefully build a parts warehouse for a new business we're in, and would like to, our hope is to continue redeveloping this property for various forestry businesses in the coming years. And that would certainly be a great aid to us and maybe others along this stretch down here in this industrial commercial area.
Thank you. So just to make sure I understand correctly, so you're looking for the expansion of municipal water and sewer, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and please walk me through again the specific area that you're hoping to focus on.
Ferry Road, we're at 31 Ferry Road. I'm not sure if there's what else I could say on that. But.
Fantastic, thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay.
Okay. Next we have Stacy. Go ahead, Stacy.
Hi. So this is kind of a spinoff, only based on my observations of driving around town. My day-to-day life. I feel like I'm seeing more and more bags of trash left along our town roadways. And it strikes me that might be because maybe people are struggling to be able to afford to dispose of their waste and trash properly. And I speak to that out of having been in a position several years ago where it sometimes was a struggle to come up with that money for a punch card, or even $5 for fast trash. Doesn't sound like much, but sometimes that was a tank, a gallon and a half of gas in the vehicle, or a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk that wasn't going to get purchased that week for the family. And then that starts to get to be hard decisions. So I'm wondering if there's some way of maybe helping to address the trash problem, is if we try to find out if there's a need to, and a way to help subsidize or assist people to get access who might be struggling otherwise, to be able to get their trash taken care of properly. I don't know. Just a thought.
Great, thank you. Okay. Looks like we've gone through everybody who have their hands up. We are going to talk through the Google document as well, but Dave, I'm going to give you the floor to bring up some of the ideas that you've been hearing from folks.
Okay. So I did have a phone call yesterday regarding the old library, which belongs to the Historical Society at this point, or is used by the Historical Society. The water quality, unsure what the water quality is. It has been tested. We're still awaiting the test results on that. However, I believe it does have to do with old pipes. They're not lead pipes, but perhaps rusted steel pipes. Discolored, sink and toilet, etc. So the idea here is again, based upon the clean water language, that something can be done over at that building there. The next came in from Roger Trottier, is regarding a pavilion over on Foster Meadow Fields. He's got a letter here that he submitted to go along with this. I'll read particularly the first paragraph here. It says, "Dear Hartland Select Board, we propose that the moderator from the Regional Planning Commission assist our community and Select Board to find a category or categories for this proposed open air pavilion project. He feels as though it may fit under 1.7 capital investment that would respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency. The money is here now. If we build it, they will come." He also talks about envisioning a solar aspect of this project, perhaps solar panels on the top and utilizing that for town buildings or for community residents. He did present a picture of the pavilion, but I will submit this to the Select Board. Wasn't able to put it into my computer, Sarah, to share screen share, but it is here from him. Lastly, from Julie Hazen, she piggybacks on the pavilion. She supports the pavilion with solar panels. It goes on to say healthy outdoor programs and meetings, or it would be good for healthy outdoor programs and meetings. She's got air purification systems for all town buildings, including library, rec center, and school, historical society, and Damon Hall, for healthy air for years to come. Solar as much as possible. She goes on to talk about healthy childhood environments. Money to rec center programs for teachers, after-school programs and summer camps. Mental health at the school for students, teachers. Social services and human services. She mentions heat pumps, town buildings, especially with solar. Again, at the Historical Society to help defray heating costs and to eliminate moisture in the summer, to keep collection in good working order. I'll let you catch up.
Unfortunately, I've lost the thread there. My apologies. So can you please go back after healthy childhood environments and run through this for me again?
So under healthy childhood environments, she talks about money to the rec center programs, or money for rec center programs. Programs for teachers, after school programs, and summer camps. She talks about supporting mental health at the school for students and teachers. And then she talked about the heat pumps at Historical Society to help defray heating costs and to eliminate moisture in the summer, to keep the collection in good working order.
Thank you.
Again, rusty water pipes in town buildings, and to support the restaurants in town.
Did she specifically mention which buildings would that have rusty water pipes, or was it also the Historical Society?
Buildings, as far as I know, that's probably specific to the old library is the one that I know that seems to be having difficulties with.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. I am looking back at our list and I see that Stacy has their hand raised.
Expanding on the open air pavilion, it would be fantastic to have a type of open air pavilion seating area up in North Hartland at the North Hartland School Rec Center area. It's a great playground area, but sometimes it would be nice to have a covered space up there. Also, the librarian Nancy had mentioned that, you know, perhaps some of these funds could also be used to expand the porch deck seating area on the library or improve upon them, possibly make a covered area where meetings could occur, and there could also be gatherings and people could sit out there and utilize the Wi-Fi.
Okay, Rebecca, go ahead.
Hi, that's actually perfect. I'm going to piggyback right on top of that. Going back to the healthy programs for kids, and I see that somebody put in a bid for more senior programming. One of the things that makes a healthy community is community activities and groups and just things to do together. And I think that our whole rec center library complex might really be underutilized. And when I was a child, and anybody who grew up here in the 70s perhaps can also attribute to this, that we had incredible arts and all kinds of programming available all summer. And it was not expensive, and it was not way over in Pomfret at Artistry. So I think that we could do a lot more. We made masks and all kinds of things, and a lot of that was through the library center. But I feel like endowing and embellishing that whole zone with Wi-Fi for the kids who don't have good Wi-Fi and just need a place outside their home to be. We could have better paths, maybe extend the path along the river. I know for my own parents in the winter, that flat path is really valuable to them, and it keeps everybody walking and active, and that's simple. But having that all sort of articulate, so there's a little bit of everything to do, I think pulls a lot of these ideas together. And that's kind of what I'd like to see as sort of some umbrella thinking, sort of that big fuzzy picture, that guiding principle. You know, it benefits everyone. It makes use of unique one-time funding that there's just not other money for. It doesn't come out of usual budgets. Use your imagination. I think that this is exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Kurt, I'm so sorry. I think I lowered your hand by accident. Go ahead.
Okay. This is actually another question. I'm thinking to myself that there are several groups in town, including Aging and Hartland, and other nonprofit community service organizations that could really benefit from a one-time consulting investment to create a system whereby everybody gets the information they need to know what these organizations can do. So it kind of ties the need together with what's available. I say that because at Aging in Hartland, we've noticed a drop off during the pandemic in calls for services from Aging in Hartland. At the same time, we know the needs are growing. The miss in our particular spot has to be people don't know how to match their needs up with what's available, not just from us, but from other community organizations as well. Is there a way to do that with ARPA money?
I think that's certainly something that would fall under lost revenue. I think you could possibly also categorize it under pandemic response, under communications, if it was very targeted towards sort of COVID-19 related services and resources. And if you want sort of just a broad kind of public awareness campaign around the full breadth of services and opportunities that are available through the community's organizations, then that could certainly fit under lost revenue. Okay, Phil, go ahead.
Hi, Phil Hobby. Yes, there is no rename function that I could find. I want to briefly say that I think we covered all the town buildings as far as air filtration and just improving the systems. That was my first item. I think that's done. The second is I'm envisioning a two-part project to enable more people to use our town properties. So possibly a project that would look at those existing properties and to build on the information that the Conservation Commission has already published, but to identify some needs that could enhance the use of those properties, whether it's Sumner Falls or Katy Brook Trails or Foster Meadow. And then part two would be to implement those small suggestions with funds.
Thank you, Phil. Okay. Looks like we have a pause in the dialogue, so I do want to just quickly take a look at the Google document, which is very full. Thank you all so much for dropping this excellent information in. And I'm not going to try to transfer all this information over to our document right now, but I do want to just sort of, for the verbal record, run through, especially for folks who are on the phone right now, so that they can see what or hear what folks have been talking about. So there was a question here about how do we know about whether the town is falling short on revenue. The lost revenue category, again, you can assign the entirety of your award as lost revenue, regardless of the amount of revenue that your town may have actually lost due to the pandemic. So again, this is sort of a standard allowance that Treasury has given us so that small towns in particular can have an easy road to using these funds as flexibly as possible. Somebody had asked, could taxes go down? That is an eligible use under ARPA for towns to reduce the tax burden on their residents. There are public policy debates to be had around that, because certainly these funds are limited, and so it could end up where you might have a large tax jump later on down the road, right, once these funds run out. So that's something that the town would need to discuss collectively and determine whether that would be beneficial or might have some difficult ramifications later on. There's this discussion about a better website, which we've talked about already. And then sort of thinking through, sort of a complete revamping of the website and making everything easy to access. And there's quite a lot of detail on that. Thank you, GT, for providing that. Digitization of land records, which again, the town staff have brought up and could potentially be fundable under a different funding source, which would save some of this ARPA money for other uses. Upgrading HVAC and doing some weatherization in the library, upgrading the North Hartland School building to make it a functional meeting space, and potentially also an emergency shelter. And again, another comment for library ventilation. Water infrastructure, comments regarding the North Hartland water system. That's come up multiple times already in our discussion. There's a comment about Lullsbrook corridor. And so I guess there's a culvert. No, perhaps this is the one on Jennyville Road. I'm not sure. That is causing some issues in that particular area. So that's something we'll have to dig in some more. Is anybody whoever entered the information about the Lullsbrook corridor, could you give us, maybe unmute yourself and just give us a little bit more detail on that?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm assuming, Dave, the culvert you mean is the one with the little tiny bridge. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we've got a couple of those. It's
The one where the water overflows, right? Where it overruns the road?
about a quarter of a mile from Densmore Hill Road.
Yeah, that's the same one.
Okay.
Yep. Part of what happens there, I drive this road every day. I live in Jennyville. Part of what happens is that the freezing and thawing that occurs more on and off throughout the winter right now will create ice shelves. And there's, I think in the past few years, more large down trees clogging up that stream corridor. And so you see it back up in that area a little more than usual, but the whole corridor, maybe the Conservation Commission is already looking at it, but it's on the verge of causing problems.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
Okay.
Okay. We also have a proposal for municipal water sewer extension from the Windsor Industrial Park to the depot area to promote new innovation in progressive industries. And then water and sewer to Hartland 3 Corners and 4 Corners, again, to promote growth. Under pandemic sort of public health response, there's a call for a community nurse, and then sort of upgrades to the Emergency Operations Center, which is currently located in a floodplain, so dealing with resilience of that facility. And we talked a little bit about this in our discussion, apprenticeships for unemployed and underemployed folks. And then also sort of expanding capacity of aging in Hartland. Again, this call for community nurse services and recreational opportunities for seniors to promote health and well-being. We have a question here. Is this where assistance for households would fall to help with home weatherization improvement, employment, childcare costs, and free up household income for other basic needs? Yes, direct assistance to households is an eligible use under ARPA. Within the category of pandemic response, there are requirements that Treasury has instituted around the income levels that could qualify for that kind of, the household income levels that qualify for that kind of direct assistance. And so there are very specific thresholds that you would have to be aware of. Again, if you were to do that kind of work under the lost revenue category, it's not clear to me whether or not that would trigger those income requirements. But so it's something to be aware of. And certainly I think there's been a lot of discussion in towns across Vermont over the past 5 months or so around this question of direct household assistance and how can towns work within ARPA to do that kind of work. I think that many towns have found that they have low capacity to set up that kind of a program, to do the sort of eligibility screening and then to set up that kind of program in a way that is consistent with Treasury's guidelines. And so some towns have they've been starting to lean towards this option of giving money to a nonprofit that does that work, right? And they would still have to report on the nonprofit's activities with the money that they had provided, but that would save the town staff sort of drain on their capacity in setting up a benefits program. So that's something to consider. Let's see here. So small business assistance, we discussed that. Sort of ventilation in public facilities, public buildings, discuss that as well. Let's see here. So are there any data or information on what the health concerns have been in Hartland specifically during the pandemic? Has it been lack of transportation for care, lack of internet, not enough funds for adequate food, lack of childcare? Those are excellent questions. And I think it's worth taking a few minutes to pause. Does anybody have any thoughts in regard or any information based on the work that you've done in the community around what the primary health concerns and health access concerns have been as a result of the pandemic? And if not, that's totally fine.
I would say isolation.
Mm-hmm. Those are certainly questions that are worth continuing to investigate. We have a call for sort of neighborhood trails, expanding walking trails in various areas. We've talked about sort of an open air pavilion for outdoor programming and meeting space. Housing, so specifically around constructing more affordable housing. And here now we're moving into the economic impacts. So we've already talked about increasing support for the services that live stream public meetings, which are so vital to the community. Creating a town Facebook page, doing some studies of what the economic impacts have been, and then providing direct assistance to households that have been particularly impacted in an economic way by the pandemic. So figuring out where that kind of direct assistance would best be targeted. And then this idea is sort of thinking through how do we deal with supply chain crises and how can the town increase its resilience around food access? And so is there some sort of formal relationship that the town could have with local food providers to make sure that there are no hiccups in the supply chain and everybody has enough food to get through difficult times? Okay. And just going to see here. So Helen, it looks like you're unmuted. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, or if you have something that you'd like to add, please go ahead and let us know.
Yeah, I would like to say that the Hartland Food Shelf is open to everyone. I couldn't get my hand up. I didn't have the icon now for some reason. But anyway, yeah, the Hartland Food Shelf is open to everyone. All they have to do is contact us if they don't know where we are or whatever. So food access should not be a problem. In fact, I'm wondering where all those people are who say they don't have food access, because that's what we're here for. Okay. We supply it to the school. They're there on Friday mornings. We were there Saturday mornings, but we didn't have a lot of people coming in. So, you know, we're here and ready, and whatever they need, we can supply them with. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And yeah, that sort of gets at the comment that was made earlier about, you know, just making sure that everybody in the community is aware of the wealth of resources that are available through the existing community networks, which, you know, can also help sort of identify where the gaps are, and then the community can more effectively address those gaps as well. We've talked a little bit about premium pay And this is specifically talking about premium pay for school employees. So that's something to consider. We've talked a fair bit about broadband, making sure that there's access for all Hartland residents. There's also sort of discussion about replacing battery systems in areas without cell service. And so this is really, it sounds like perhaps sort of a resiliency measure for the existing broadband network. And so that's something that I'm not sure if it would specifically fall under the broadband category, because I think the broadband category within ARPA is really focusing on expansion of the network or cybersecurity. So that would need some more digging into whether that would actually fit under the broadband category, but it could certainly go under lost revenue if that's deemed a health and safety kind of an investment. And we've already talked about Wi-Fi sort of in key locations around the town, making sure that folks have access. And then we do have another sort of suggestion under other, which would be substance abuse resource expansion. There is some discussion within ARPA about substance abuse resources. And that's not something I'm terribly familiar with, but I think it might be, there's certainly behavioral health sort of services that are considered, they're considered eligible uses, and then also to be also considered eligible are expansion of access to evidence-based services for opioid use disorder prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery. So I think that there might be sort of space within the public health response category to include that, but again, also that could be also considered lost revenue. So just wanted to run through that. Thank you for bearing with me as we walk through the comments in the Google Doc. Please do keep adding them if you have anything else you'd like to add. Andrea, I see that you have your hand up. Go ahead. Andrea Ambrose, you are muted. There you go.
Yes, thank you very much. So thinking about pie in the sky, something I've thought about for a number of years. I'm not sure if it would fit under this category of use, but there are a lot of nonprofits in the town of Hartland and volunteer organizations that do a lot in the town for the people of the town. And that runs the gamut of, aging in Hartland to, of course, Hartland Winter Trails and many, many others. And they're all almost exclusively being run by volunteers. And anything that we can do to support those volunteers and those organizations, because they do cover kind of the whole age spectrum and a lot of areas of town that a lot of townspeople benefit directly from, would help those organizations. And I would love to see the town hire a very part-time person that would specialize in grant writing. And this would be potentially benefiting the town itself. And that person would be able to research and know what grants are available and could fit certain organizations, including the town. And writing for grants can be very tricky and challenging. And so someone who specializes in that would have a much better percentage of outcome, I think. And any other supportive services that person could do, I'm thinking of media and helping volunteer organizations be able to create better websites or getting them hooked into media that gets information out to the public. And so it'd be a very part-time position specifically geared towards town needs and a lot of the volunteer and nonprofit organizations in town that could utilize the person to help them out.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Folks would like to add. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to transition us back to looking at our evaluation criteria. I'm going to go ahead and share that with everyone. And I just want us to revisit what we've talked about in light of the project ideas that we've just discussed as a group. Taking a look at chat here. Okay, yep, that was sort of echoing an idea that was already proposed. Okay, so these are the criteria that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting as the criteria that the committee that will eventually be formed to support the select board in these expenditure decisions could use to help evaluate and prioritize projects. And at our next meeting, January 27th, we're going to be doing some project prioritization. We probably won't have everything set in stone at the end of that meeting, but we can at least start ranking projects. When you look at this list that we've already developed, size of the project, complexity of the project, duration of the project, long-lasting results for the town, who is this project serving? Is it serving populations that are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic? Addressing basic needs. Does this project sort of really focus on the basic necessities of life and quality of life? Does the project benefit the largest number of people possible? Is it increasing the town's resilience around future crises? Is it fiscally sustainable? Is it a project that would be hard to fund otherwise if we didn't have this sort of funding stream from Treasury available? Is it something that can really take advantage of this unique opportunity because otherwise there wouldn't be funding for it? Are there additional criteria that you'd like to see added to this list based on the conversation we've had this evening? Phil, go ahead.
I'd like to add to the size, complexity, and duration that I think Jim added, cost. You know, if you change something with duration or add scope, then cost goes up. So understanding the cost as well as those items that Jim sort of put on there.
Thank you. Rebecca, go ahead.
I'd just like to add kind of, that fuzzier umbrella component to increasing resilience by promoting as many healthy things in town as we can. Many ways to interact, get together, talk to each other, small groups, whatever. Increasing the overall health of our town as one of those umbrella things.
Great, thank you. Other additions to the list? Okay, so what I'd like to do then is to ask for your feedback on which of these criteria you feel are more important. And this can be tough, and it's worth having some discussion collectively around, if we had to rank these in order of most important to least important for when we're evaluating projects, what should be towards the top of that list and what would be toward the bottom of that list? It's not to say that one of these is not important, but really when we think about how we're going to prioritize a project, what do we need to be thinking about first and foremost? Phil, go ahead.
Since we're talking about one-time monies and all the criteria that we've been talking about, I think long-lasting results for the town / impact for, for the town it should be a key criteria. Things that we can't normally do. As I think Dave mentioned, we could do things with tax dollars, or someone else mentioned, but those take a long time. So what can we do that has that impact right now?
Thank you. Bert, go ahead.
Okay. I'm looking at this list, and Gregory Burke said something that if you look at it in light of targeting populations disproportionately affected, I think that if you combine those two, that would be 50% of the two most important criteria. In other words, if you built a pavilion, and I'm not saying that this was part of the idea, but just as a hypothetical, if you built a pavilion that you had to have transportation to get to, and it wasn't totally comfortable for people with disabilities or illness or whatever, in a way, it's not really benefiting everybody. At the same time, if you do something for just the people who have food insecurity, it's only benefiting those people and not everybody. So I think that, looking very carefully at the projects from those two combined criteria is really 50% of the two important ones. And the other criteria is kind of mushing together the things that the town really needs to physical things like the culvert on Jennyville Road that floods, and water systems that are leaving people without clean water, and businesses that can't do anything because they don't have water and sewer. The infrastructure, I guess you could say generally, that would be the other 50% of the two most important things.
So what I'm hearing are sort of addressing basic needs, right? Because that's sort of the water piece of this, and safety, right? Health and safety.
From my point of view, it's more looking at it from the town's point of view rather than individual groups or people that are benefited. That it's something that is the town's responsibility that the money could help them fulfill, and that would be. I mean, it doesn't make any difference to me personally if North Hartland doesn't have clean water, but I think it's a responsibility of our little society, Hartland, to provide clean water to North Hartland if we know we can do it and we have the dough.
So I might categorize that under increasing resilience. How do you feel about that?
You're so much smarter than I that I'm going to go along with it.
Okay. Thank you, Kurt. That's very helpful.
I have to say, this is one of the most professional presentations I've seen lately.
Well, thank you. It's a joy to be with you all this evening. Stacy, go ahead.
So I would just like to make a little comment on as far as helping people who are in need, specifically people who are struggling with food, meeting their food needs, so on and so forth, by helping those within our community who are the most vulnerable, the most impacted, economically challenged. You are, as a whole, by lifting them up, strengthening the community as a whole. So, actually helping those people. I would also say that one of the top priorities would be, again, looking at things that are fiscally responsible and fiscally sustainable. That's really important too.
Thank you. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, Stacy, was it just you who were speaking a minute ago?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Helen, you're next on the list.
Yeah, I was thinking that increasing resilience is also extremely important, and that kind of covers all of those bases, I think. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Sarah, go ahead.
Helen just beat me to the point. I think that the entry increasing resilience, avoiding future crises, addressing future crises, by increasing the overall health and well-being of the town, I do think that actually it's really future thinking, it's future proofing. And I think it contains so many of the other things. And it's overall health and well-being of the town in the sense of health and well-being of each and every resident, not just some. And I will say that some probably need more help than others. And so that gets back to the targeting certain populations. But I think that increasing resilience for overall health and well-being of the town in a way tops them all because it includes so many of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Brian, you're up.
Sure, this might be more of a secondary priority, but I think it's important to be mindful of the resources needed to be able to fulfill some of these goals and ideas. So making sure that we might be able to use ARPA money to pay for the staff or hiring people to actually fulfill these goals, and not necessarily relying on existing town staff to address some of these needs, is just an important priority for me, recognizing that all of us staff only have certain capabilities and availability and resources already. So if we can utilize ARPA funds to hire individuals to facilitate or actually put forth these ideas, I think that's important to consider.
Thank you, Brian. And that's certainly an eligible use of ARPA is to use your funds to administer the program or the project that you would like to do with ARPA. And there is no, I know in many grants, folks who are familiar with the grant world maybe, are aware that oftentimes those kinds of admin costs are capped at a certain percentage or a certain amount. And we don't see that kind of prescription within the final rule. Okay, thank you, Brian. Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to second Brian's comment. I had this on my original list. I wasn't sure if it was within the parameters, especially as you sort of rephrased them at the beginning. But the way I expressed it was expand the administration, partial support for additional staff to handle the additional projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Chuck, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Sarah and everyone. I'd like to suggest as a criteria projects that are based on successful models that have been deployed elsewhere, so that we don't select projects that don't necessarily have a track record of success, and that we use research in evaluating projects to know that there's a high probability that they will be successful in achieving the goals that have been outlined or demonstrated.
Great, thank you, Chuck. Would you consider that a top priority or a secondary priority?
I'm sorry?
Would you consider that a top priority or a lesser?
Well, to me, selecting projects with a high probability of success would be an important criteria.
Thank you, Chuck. We are getting close on time here, so I see a couple more hands raised. We're going to take comments from Gregory and Stacy, and then we're going to wrap up. So Gregory, go ahead.
Yeah, my comment will be brief. Just second what Chuck was saying. I think the likelihood of success is a very important criterion. Thanks.
Thank you, Gregory. Stacy, go ahead.
One of the things I don't really see in the criteria here, and it might be a secondary one, but is getting sort of the biggest bang for our bucks, the largest return on any investment that we do, any project we embark upon. How we can choose those projects that are just going to, you know, have the biggest benefit across the board, or the biggest, you know, overall impact.
Thank you. It sounds like that might sort of jive with the benefit the largest number of people as possible, but perhaps in a more expansive way. Okay. All right. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of a busy week and sticking with us this late in the evening. We really appreciate it. I am going to leave the Google Doc open for the rest of the evening. So if something strikes you after this meeting and you think, oh, I really want to add that to the list, go ahead to the Google Doc, keep that link on your computer and go ahead and add it. And then I do want to also, I'm going to hand this back over to Dave in a minute here, but I wanted to also let you all know that the town has put together an email address, which is arpa@heartlandbt.org, where you can continue to send in thoughts and ideas. And in particular, if you gave us an idea this evening that was sort of a broad brush kind of an idea, a generic kind of category, if as you're mulling it over, you think of more specifics of what that could actually look like, the more specific we can get with these project ideas, the better, because that helps us with the prioritization process, but it also helps the committee and its future work in actually whittling down the projects that are going to be doable and can fit into the town's vision for this ARPA funding. So again, that's arpa@heartlandbt.org. And the Google document is going to be open for the rest of the evening. So go ahead and continue to add thoughts there. And I'm going to pass it back over to Dave now.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to you, and thank you to everybody that participated. I would like to remind everybody that there is a part 2 on January 27th at 6:30. Again, hope to continue to hone in on this and narrow the scope. I think the enthusiasm was great, and then again, we're looking for some individuals to kind of carry the ball after that, is to make up a committee, again, to work through some of the details here. So again, looking to see you on January the 27th. Thank you to everybody, and Mary, would you like to officially adjourn the meeting?
Yes, I would, Dave. Thank you. So it's just about 8:30, and I need a motion from one of the select board members to call for adjournment of this meeting. Phil is making a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Somebody's got a second. Jim?
I second.
Great. I bet there's a consensus. I'm going to go assume. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you very, very much. It was excellent. And thanks for everybody else for joining in. Good night.
Take care. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.